Hi, what a great turnout. This is very exciting. Can you all hear me? Is it loud enough? Great, thank you. Just a very short introduction and then we'll get to the program right away. If you're standing, we're going to get a few more chairs, we hope. But anyway, welcome to Haverford College. This is the Yiddish Culture Festival's 20th year of providing programs to celebrate Yiddish and Eastern European culture. My name is Jeff Tikoski-Feldman, and I'm a professor of math here, together with my colleagues, Professors Dan Gillis, who unfortunately is ill and not with us today, Mel Santer and Sid Perlow, who's in the back. We've been delighted to join with you in programs of films, concerts, lectures, and readings. We hope that you'll sign up on our mailing lists outside the lecture hall if you're not on our list, so we can invite you to future events. And I'll say more about this at the end of the program. In particular, I want to take this time to actually fondly remember our dear departed colleague, Mel Santer, who was really the lifeblood of this organization. He died last summer, and he would have been so excited to see all of you here. We have a real treat today, as we have a wonderful lineup of speakers and performers to help us commemorate Sholem Aleichem. I want to introduce the first of these, Andy Castle, and he's the mastermind and director of this entire presentation. Please join me in thanking and welcoming Andy Castle.
And thank you very much all for coming out. This is an amazing turnout. There's lots of other things we know you could be doing on this nice spring day. You could be playing cricket out on Haverford's lawn or throwing snowballs or watching the Phillies. But you chose to come here, which means that you love Yiddish or you love Sholem Aleichem, which of course is the same thing. You also likely know why this is happening now. May 13th of this year, or May 18th if you're using the Hebrew calendar, the 10th of ER, marks Sholem Aleichem's 100th yortzayt. And as you will hear in just a moment, he asked in his last will and testament, his tzavoah in Yiddish, that on the anniversary of his death, his family and friends should gather to read a few of his stories, the comic ones in particular, and to remember him with laughter. Those gatherings have become a tradition in the Yiddish world, mainly in New York, where many of his family still live, but elsewhere as well. Here at Haverford, we last held a Sholem Aleichem commemoration 10 years ago on the 90th yortzayt, and if you were here with us back then, welcome back. How many were here 10 years ago? I knew there'd be some. If not, let me tell you how it'll go. We're going to begin by reading Sholem Aleichem's will, which is the traditional thing to do on his yortzayt. And this is going to be read in Yiddish by Mark Alsher and in English by Ann Ellen Dichter. And then we're going to see a little film, hear some stories, listen to some music, and hopefully fulfill Sholem Aleichem's request that he be remembered with warmth and laughter, as well as maybe a bissel insight into his work and its meaning for all of us. He died on May 13th, 1916. In his Bronx apartment. He was only 57 years old, brought down by a combination of ailments that had plagued him in his last years, but which hardly slowed the prodigious output of his stories, essays, plays, novels, a body of work that few writers have ever equaled in any language, and which makes up an essential part of what we think of today as the Yiddish classics. He was called the Jewish Mark Twain. And there you see a cartoon from the day, from one of the Yiddish papers of the day, which made fun of the fact that some people said, well, Mark Twain should shine his shoes. He's so much better. And others, of course, said, well, he should shine Mark Twain's shoes. And finally, they decided that Sholem Aleichem should shine Sholem Aleichem's shoes. And the nickname is stuck, in part because his influence on the Yiddish world parallels Mark Twain's influence on American literature. But more distinctively, Sholem Aleichem also chronicled a people in transition. In Joseph Dorman's excellent film, Laughing in the Darkness, which we're going to see a little bit of shortly, there's an interview with scholar Ruth Weiss, who noted, and I quote, "Jews have undergone a tremendous process of transformation, and Sholem Aleichem, perhaps more than any writer, has captured its difficulty. He captured its challenges. He captured its humor." What Ruth Weiss says is if you don't know Sholem Aleichem, you're missing a key part of Jewish modernization, of transition, and it's a way of understanding who we became and who we are. You're also missing a key part of understanding, I think, the roots of modern Jewish humor. I was listening the other day to an interview with Larry David, the guy who was responsible for Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. And David was explaining to the interviewer how he got so much material out of all the little tiny details of everyday life. People used to say the Seinfeld show was a show about nothing. What David said, and I quote, was, "I like to take the small things and make them big, and take the big things, like war and death and disease, and make them small." Well, if you've read the Tevye stories, or those about the little people of Kasrelivka, or Sholem Aleichem's railroad stories, you know that whether you think of it as Larry David humor or Jewish humor, it all comes straight from Sholem Aleichem. As I say, he was called the Jewish Mark Twain, and that's indeed how the press introduced him before what turned out to be his last public reading, which was in Philadelphia on March 4th, 1916, at the Metropolitan Opera House on Broad Street. Little local connection here. The Yiddish press, however, hardly needed to introduce him. This is from the Yiddish Welt, which was Philadelphia's largest Yiddish newspaper in those days. Nearly every one of Philadelphia's 200,000 Jews, most of whom had immigrated from Russia over the previous 30 years, knew him intimately. They had grown up with Sholem Aleichem. For 30 years, they had been reading his stories in the Yiddish press. And that's why every one of the Metropolitan Opera's 4,000 seats were filled that night. Now, sadly, the man they came to hear that night was very ill. He was weakened by the effects of diabetes and tuberculosis, and he had accepted the offer of $250 to come to Philadelphia only because he really needed the money, having recently lost his contract at that time with the New York Yiddish newspaper, Der Tag, who had given him a retainer to write for them when he came to America, not the first time, when he came to America in 1914. But that contract was ended, and he was in dire need of money. And so the story of his appearance here ended even more sadly, moreover, as he wrote to an acquaintance a few days after returning to New York. "Ich bin gewesen in Philadelphia. Das Metropolitan Theater ist gewesen gepackt. Mehr als 5.000 Menschen, sagt man. A chevre bluffers haben mir gut abgeblufft und abgelegt, sagt man, a Beintel." If you don't know what that means, it means a gang of bluffers or swindlers really bluffed me good. And people say they licked up a bone, which I guess is an idiom, means they made out like bandits. They apparently took in $2,200, he wrote. To me, they only gave $250. Es haben sie mir reingerückt a Check. Gekommen cashen dem Check, lost sich raus, als sie haben dem Check abgerufen. Und mir haben sie gelost, dort das, was man es chamisch ausser beschwat, und man macht darauf Borei Peri Heiz. So, when they went to cash the check, they'd stopped it. And they left me with what you eat on the 15th of Shvat, with the blessing, he who creates the fruit of the tree. Basically, it was, he got nothing. But here you see an example of a man who found humor even in his own dark situation, his own troubles. By the way, they did eventually collect the $250. Some of his friends went to the promoters of that concert and said if they didn't pay up, they were never going to be able to show their faces in Philadelphia again. And he did get paid. But 8 weeks later, the man himself was gone. In death, he was elevated from a celebrity to a cultural icon almost instantly. His funeral procession drew some 150,000 people through the streets of New York. It put the Jewish community on the political map of America with a vengeance. His will was read on the floor of Congress, and even the Philadelphia Jewish Exponent, which had entirely ignored the appearance here in March, this time they took appropriate note. They ran a lengthy posthumous account of the Met reading, and they also printed a chapter of the Mottel stories with a very odd translation of the title. If you look on the right, the Yiddish title was a Schmalzgrub, and somehow that came out as the Valley of Fatness. I will say, I checked it out. Other translators have had equal trouble. One translated it as swimming in chicken fat, and another rendered it as a gold mine, which is closer, I think. But this brings up the very interesting subject of how do you translate Sholem Aleichem. That, however, is a subject for another time. Right now, I want to introduce two of my favorite local Yiddishists to read Sholem Aleichem's will. Mordechai Alsher is a longtime teacher, scholar, and Yiddish Liebhaber, and the man whose night class at Gratz College many years ago was my doorway to a wonderful world of language and literature and tradition. Chana Chaiker Dichter, also known as Ann Ellen, is a local Jewish educator, a veteran of the fondly remembered Haverford Hof, the Yiddish Lehenkreis that used to meet around here, and a mother of two wonderful sons. She is also a regular stage reader with Theater Ariel, which if you don't know anything about, you should ask her, because they offer wonderful theatrical salons around Philadelphia. Mordechai, Chana Chaiker.
Die Zavoe von Sholem Aleichem, ich werd öffnen und veröffentlichen in dem Tag von mein Teut, Sholem Aleichem. Jud Aleph Tishrei, Hey, Tufreish Ayin Vuv, 19 September 1915, New York. Heintigen Tag, Mochras Yom HaKippurim, es hat sich Norwus ungeheuben ein neues Jahr, in a groß Imglück hat getroffen mein Familie. Gestorben mein älterer Sohn Misha Michael Rabinowitz, in weggetrugen mit sich in Kever ein Stück von mein Leben. Ist geblieben bei mir, ich soll überschreiben auf das Nei mein Savoie, welche ich hab gehad geschrieben in dem Jahr 1908 bei mein Kranksein in Nervi, Italien.
The last will and testament of Sholem Aleichem. I ask that this be opened and published on the day of my death, 11th of Tishrei, 5676, 19th of September, 1915, New York. Today, the day after Yom Kippur, a new year has just begun and a great misfortune has befallen my family. Death took my oldest son, Misha, Michael Rabinovitz, who carried off with him to his grave a piece of my life. So it remains for me to rewrite my will, which I wrote in 1908 when I was ill in Nervi, Italy.
Seien dick gesinnt und in vollen Verstand schreibe ich mein Savoie, was besteht in 10 Punkten. Aleph. Wie ich soll nicht sterben, soll man mich behalten nicht zwischen Aristokraten, Miuchosim oder Gvirim, nur grad zwischen proste Jiden Arbeiter mit nemesen Volk. Azoi, als die Matzeve, was me wird noch wegstellen auf mein Kever, soll beschenen die einfache Kvurim arim mir, und die einfache Kvurim sollen bepitzen mein Matzeve. Azoi, wie das proste, ehrliche Volk hat für mein Leben beschent sehr Volksschreiber.
Being well and in full command of my senses, I write my will, which consists of 10 points. 1. Wherever I die, I wish to be buried not among aristocrats, big shots, or wealthy people, but precisely among ordinary folk, workers, the real Jewish people, so that the gravestone which will be placed on my grave will beautify the simple graves around me, and the simple graves will beautify my grave, just as the simple, honest folk during my life beautified their folk writer.
Beis. Kein Schim Titeln mit Leubenischen, mit Moirei, Moirenus, soll auf mein Matzeve nicht sein. Äußer der Numen Sholem Aleichem von ein Seite und äußer dem jiddischen Aufschrift, was beigelegt von der anderen Seite.
2. There should be absolutely no titles or words of praise or our teacher on my gravestone, except for the name Sholem Aleichem on one side and the Yiddish epitaph enclosed on the other.
Gimel. Kein Schim Debatten und Diskussionen von meinen Kollegen wegen Verebigen mein Numen, wegen Aufstellen mir am Monument in New York und desgleichen soll nicht sein. Ich will nicht können einliegen Riek in Kever, als meine Chaverim wollen sich narrisch machen. Der beste Monument wird sein für mir, als man wird lehnen meine Werk und als es wollen sich gefinden in die vermögliche Klassen von unser Volk, Mäzenaten, wo es wollen sich nehmen, herausgeben und verspreiten meine Werk, hein in Jiddisch, hein in andere Sprachen, und damit geben dem Volk die Möglichkeit zu lesen und meine Familie eine bekuvede Existenz. Ich habe nicht solche gewähnt oder nicht verdient, kein Mäzenaten bei meinem Leben, weil ich sehr öfter solche sein noch in Teut. Ich gehe weg von der Welt mit dem vollen Glauben, als das Volk wird nicht verlassen meine Jesäumen.
3. There should be absolutely no debates or discussions among my colleagues about immortalizing my name, about erecting a monument to me in New York, etc. I will not be able to rest comfortably in my grave if my friends engage in such foolishness. The best monument for me will be that people will read my works and that patrons will be found among the wealthier segments of our people who will undertake to publish and distribute my works, both in Yiddish and in other languages, and in this way make it possible for the people to read them and my family to live decently. If I was not decreed worthy or wasn't able to earn the honor of such patronage during my lifetime, perhaps I will be deemed worthy of it after my death. I leave this world with the full conviction that the people will not forsake my orphans.
Daled. Auf mein Käfer in der Nacht das ganze Jahr und später allemal zum Yortzayt soll mein übergebliebener einziger Sinn, wie euch meine Edems, ob sie wollen, suchen noch mehr Kaddisch. Und ob sie wollen, kein Cheshik nicht haben, oder die Zeit wird sie nicht erlauben, oder sie wird sein gegen ihre religiöse Überzeugungen, können sie Jötze sein nur damit, wo sie wollen sich zu neufkläuben alle mit die Töchter meine und mit die Einiglich und mit glatt gitte Freund und vorlehnen die dosige Zavoe meine und euch auskläuben am Meise von meine Meiselich von die Samme Freiliche und vorlehnen es in wusserer Sprache sie wird für sie sein mehr verständlich. In los mein Numen der Mond wären von sie besser mit der Gelächter eider gurnit der Mond wären.
4. At my gravesite and every day for a year after that, and subsequently on the anniversary of my death, my remaining son, as well as my sons-in-law, if they wish, should say Kaddish for me. And if they don't feel like doing that, or time will not permit, or it will be against their religious convictions, they can make up for it only by all of them gathering with my daughters and with the grandchildren and with just good friends and reading this last will of mine, and also picking out a story from among my little stories, one of the very happiest, and reading it aloud in whatever language will be more understandable to them, and let my name be mentioned by them with a laugh, better than never to be mentioned at all.
Hey, religiöse Überzeugungen können meine Kinder und Kindskinder haben, wussere sie willen. Nur sehr jiddische Abstammung bete ich, sie sollen hitten. Diejenigen von meinen Kindern, was wollen sich abwerfen von seiner Stamm und wollen darüber in einander glauben, haben sich schon damit allein abgeworfen von seiner Stamm und von seiner Familie und allein ausgemerkt sich von mein Savoe, wie ein lohem chelek v'nachlo besoich achayim.
5. As to religious convictions, my children and my children's children may have whatever ones they want, but their Jewish heritage I beg them to safeguard. Those of my children who will cast off their background and go over to another faith will thereby themselves cast themselves off from their roots and their family, and will have thus erased themselves from my last will. And they shall have no portion and inheritance among their brethren.
Wov, als was ich vermog, seien mir Simmen, ob das Min wird sich gefunden in mein Besitz, seien Bücher, gedruckte und in Manuskript, seien Jiddisch, seien andere Sprachen, äußer die, was sind übersetzt in Hebräisch, gehört zu mein Freu Hudel Bas Elimelech oder Olga Rabinowitz und noch ihr Teut geht es herüber zu meinen Kindern gleich auf gleich, zu meiner Tochter Chaya Esther Ernestina Berkowitz, zu meiner Tochter Sura Lialia Kaufmann, zu meiner Tochter Nomi Emma Rabinowitz, zu meiner Tochter Miriam Marussia Rabinowitz und zu meinem Sohn Nochem Numa Rabinowitz. Und was unbelangt zu meinen Werken Hebräisch, gehören sie zum meisterhaften Übersetzer, mein Schwiegersohn Jud Dalet Berkowitz, und zu seiner Tochter, mein Enkel Tamara Berkowitz, das soll sein ihr Naden. Die Tantiemen, was wollen hereinfallen für meine Pjessen, hein in Russland, wie hein in Amerika, soll halb gehen zu meine Jorschim und halb soll abgelegt werden auf den Numen von mein Enekel Bella, die Tochter von Michael und Sora Kaufmann, das soll sein ihr Naden.
6. Everything I own, both in monies, if such will be found in my possession, and in books, printed or in manuscript, both in Yiddish and in other languages, except for those translated into Hebrew, belong to my wife, Chodel Beis Elimelech, or Olga Rabinovitz, and after her death, it goes to all my children equally. To my daughter, Chaya Esther Ernestina Berkovitz, to my daughter, Sora Lialia Kaufman, to my daughter, Nemi Emma Rabinovitz, to my daughter, Miriam Marusia Rabinovitz, and to my son, Nachum Numa Rabinovitz. And as to my works in Hebrew, they belong to their masterful translator, my son-in-law, I.D. Berkovitz, and to his daughter, my grandchild, Tamara Berkovitz. That should be her dowry. Of the royalties that might arrive from my plays, both in Russia and America, half should go to my family, and half should be put away in the name of my granddaughter Bella, the daughter of Michael and Sora Kaufman. Let that be her dowry.
Seien, von alle Hachnusses, was sind ausgerechnet in früheren Paragraph, soll hintergenommen werden für ein Fond für jüdische Schreibers in Jiddisch und in Hebräisch bis 5.000 Rubel a Jahr, 5%, und ob die Hachnusse wird sein mehr von 5.000 Rubel a Jahr, ist 10%. Zum Beispiel von 6.000 Rubel 600, von 7.700, von 8.000 Rubel 800 Rubel und so weiter. Ob in jener Zeit wird sein als ein Fond, du in Amerika oder dort in Europe, sollen die Prozenten alle Jahr eingezahlt werden in Fond rein und der Fond wird hin laut seine Statuten. Bei ihm aber, es wird bis dann kein offizieller Fond nicht sein oder es wird sein als ein Fond, was entspricht nicht mein Willen, was ist ausgerät in Unheb von einem dusigen Paragraph, sollen die Prozenten zerteilt werden, nicht bedürftige Schriftsteller von meiner Jorschim direkt, laut Vereinigung zwischen sich.
7. Of all the sources of income listed in the preceding paragraph, 5% of up to 5,000 rubles a year should be deducted for a fund for Jewish writers in Yiddish and in Hebrew. And if the annual income amounts to more than 5,000 rubles a year, then 10% should be deducted, for example, from 6,000 rubles, 600, from 7,700, from 8,000 rubles, 800 rubles, etc. If at that time there will exist such a fund here in America or there in Europe, the percentages should be paid into the fund every year, and the fund will act according to its statutes. But if up to that time there will exist no official fund, or such a fund will exist which does not espouse my will as it is expressed at the beginning of this paragraph, the percentages should be distributed to needy writers by my family directly according to their mutual agreement.
Ches, ob ich will nicht beweisen für mein Leben, allein wegzustellen am Atzeve auf den Käfer von mein Norwus verstorbenem Sinn Michael Misha Rabinowitz in Kopenhagen, sollen dus tien meine Jorschim bejadrechove und in dem Tug von sein Yortzayt soll alle Jahre gesucht werden Kaddish und zerteilt werden Chai Kroin Tzedokah La'aniyim.
8. If I do not succeed while I live to erect a tombstone on the grave of my just deceased son Michael Misha Rabinovitz in Copenhagen, then let my heirs do it with a generous hand. And on the anniversary of his death every year, let the prayer for the dead be recited and 18 crowns distributed to the poor as charity.
Tess, mein Wunsch ist, als meine Jorschim sollen sich einordnen azoi, als meine Werk und meine Pjessen sollen litzmisses nicht verkauft werden, nicht du in Amerika, nicht in Europe, nur sie sollen beweisen, zu leben von seiner Einkunft alle Jahren, wo es gehört zu sei, laut Gesetz von dem Land. Seiden es wird kommen als eine Zeit, oder es wird sich gefunden als eine Scheute, wo es wird upzullen für ein Schiss als eine Summe, welche soll können sein geneig auf euch zu halten am Spuche. Dann sollen sich alle Jorschim zwischen sich verständigen und ob die Mehrheit wird zustimmen, soll man sich mit die Mesumonim zerteilen, chelik ke chelik leut Paragraph Wov und koidem kol sollen die 10% herabgenommen werden für einen jiddischen Literaturfond leut Paragraph sein.
9. My wish is that my heirs should arrange their affairs in such a way that my works and my plays should never be sold, not here in America and not in Europe, but that they should succeed in living on the income from them all the years that are rightfully theirs according to the laws of the land. Unless some time comes or some fool may be found who will pay for the rights an amount enough to support a family, then all the heirs should come to a mutual understanding, and if the majority is willing, let them divide the monies among themselves, share and share alike, according to paragraph 6. But first of all, let the 10% be deducted for the Jewish Literature Fund, according to paragraph 7.
Jud, mein letzter Wunsch zu meinen Nachfolger und mein Bakusche zu meinen Kindern. Uphitten die Mame, beschenen ihr Älter, versissen ihr bitter Leben, heilen ihr gebrochen Herz, noch mir nicht weinen, nur Adarabe, der monnen mich mit Fried, und der Iker zwischen sich leben in Frieden, nicht trugen kein Sinne eins auf das andere, euch helfen sich einer dem Zweiten in einer schlechter Zeit, der monnen sich amul in der Bespuche, Rachmunes hoben glatt auf an eure Mann, und bei gitte Imständen zullen meine Chäuves über selche wollen sein. Kinder, trugt mit Ehre mein verhurewitten jiddischen Numen, in der Gott, wo's im Himmel, soll euch sein zu Hilf, Amen. Sholem ben Menachem Nochem Rabinowitz, Sholem Aleichem.
10. My last wish to my successors and my plea to my children. Watch over your mother, beautify her old age, sweeten her bitter life, heal her broken heart. Don't cry for me. On the contrary, speak of me with joy, and the main thing, live in peace with one another, bear no enmity one toward another, help one another in bad times. Think at times of the family, take pity on any pauper, and in good times pay my debts if there will be any. Children, bear with honor my hard-earned Jewish name, and may the God which is in heaven be your help. Amen. Sholem ben Menachem Nochem Rabinowitz.
Die Epitaphie von Sholem Aleichem, geschrieben von ihm allein und ausgekritzt auf sein Matzeve. Du liegt a Jid a Pusheter, geschrieben Jiddisch-Deutsch für Weiber und für ein prosten Volk hat gewesen a Humorist, a Schreiber. Das ganze Leben ausgelacht, geschlagen mit der Welt Kapuris, die ganze Welt hat Gitt gemacht und Oivei gewesen auf Zures. Und aufgedämmelt, wenn der Eulem hat gelacht, geklatscht und pflegt sich freien, hat gekränkt, das weiß nur Gott, besod, als keiner soll nicht sehen. Sholem Aleichem.
Sholem Aleichem's epitaph, written by him and engraved on his tombstone. Here lies a Jew, a plain one, who wrote in Yiddish for women and for plain folk. His whole life he scoffed at everything, derided the whole world. The whole world enjoyed itself, and he, oy vey, he was in trouble. And precisely when the crowd laughed, clapped, and amused itself, he grieved. This only God knows, secretly, so none should see. Sholem Aleichem.
Always tears me up. I just, every year. Okay, we will try. We will try. And now, I would like to introduce now a very special guest who comes to us all the way from the Upper West Side. Joe Dorman is a documentary filmmaker based in Manhattan. Among his films are Arguing the World, about the New York intellectuals, Colliding Dreams, about the history of Zionism, and a forthcoming film on the late New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. But he's here today to talk about his 2011 film called Laughing in the Darkness, which combined rarely seen photographs and archival footage with interviews with scholars like Ruth Weiss, who I mentioned earlier, Dan Miron, Hillel Halkin, and Sholem Aleichem's granddaughter, Belle Kaufman, whom you heard mentioned in the will, to bring Sholem Aleichem's world and his stories to life. Joe?
Thanks a lot. First, what we're going to do is we're going to show a small portion of the film. This portion is about the Tevye stories and Sholem Aleichem. It's about 12 minutes, and after that, I'm just going to talk for a few more minutes about Sholem Aleichem and his stories. So, Justin, go ahead, and let's hope it works.
What he called his republic was central to his life. But his 4 daughters and 2 sons were growing up in the cosmopolitan city of Kiev, a world far removed from his own shtetl childhood. Acutely aware of the growing distance between them, Sholem Aleichem would invent a new literary character, Tevye the Dairyman. Like the author himself, Tevye was a man with many daughters. Over the next 20 years, he would return to Tevye in story after story, using him to explore his own conflicts and those of the changing Jewish world.
Many are the thoughts in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord shall prevail. Isn't that what it says in the Bible? I don't have to spell it out for you, Pan Sholem Aleichem, but in ordinary language, that is in plain Yiddish, it means that the best horse can do with a whipping and the cleverest man with advice. When God decides to punish a man, he begins by removing his brains. How many times have I said to myself, Tevye, you jackass, would you ever have been taken for such a ride if you weren't the big fool you are?
There was a man whose name was Tevye. He delivered milk to the inhabitants of the area where Sholem Aleichem lived. He was a tiny little man with a black beard that grew out of his chin. He had no daughters at all. But Sholem Aleichem liked to talk to him, so they would sit on the porch and talk. And Sholem Aleichem began to write a series of feuilletons, of essays about Tevye the milkman and his 7 daughters.
He's being asked whether he has children. He says, Kinder, sage ich, nicht zu versündigen. Of course I have children. If each child is worth $1 million, then bin ich reichen von dem größten Gewehr in Jehupetz. Then I am richer than the richer Jew or man in Kiev. Money the millionaires have, what I have is daughters. And when you have daughters, they say, forget dem Gelächter, you forget to smile, you forget to laugh, because daughters is a serious business.
Every time Sholem Aleichem writes a new Tevye story, let's say he writes a Tevye story in 1893, and then he writes another Tevye story in 1898, and 5 years have passed between the writing of the stories. 5 years have also passed in the life of Tevye. That is, Sholem Aleichem always respects the real chronology. But 5 years have also passed in the life of the author, Sholem Aleichem himself. So the Tevye is written over 20 years. It's a novel written in real time, as it were. This is very unusual. I can't think of another book in the history of literature that has this structure.
In an early story, Tevye's first daughter, Tzeitel, rejects the suitor her parents have chosen for her and insists on marrying for love. Despite his firm belief in Jewish tradition, Tevye cannot find it in his heart to refuse her. His second daughter, Huddle, is equally headstrong.
Huddle, my second daughter, she's like the Bible says of Queen Esther, pretty as a picture. And if looks aren't bad enough, she has the brains to go with them. She reads and writes both Yiddish and Russian and swallows books like hotcakes. What do a book and a dairyman's daughter have in common?
Each one of these daughters is acting out a fantasy that they, without really knowing it themselves, have gotten from Tevye, from their father. Hodel ends up marrying a young Jewish atheist who is a revolutionary, and Tevye is heartbroken. And yet Hodel, Tevye's daughter's fervent belief that it's not fair that some people live in poverty and others live in wealth. She's gotten all this from Tevye himself. It's Tevye who is constantly dreaming of becoming rich himself. It's Tevye who is constantly saying, why is Brodsky the sugar magnate in Kiev? Why does he have millions and I have nothing? Why do I have to struggle all my life and the Jews are living on Easy Street? It isn't fair. Now, Tevye himself never dreams that he's going to raise a child who actually takes this so seriously that she's going to join a revolutionary movement that wants to overthrow the rich and kill them all so that the poor can inherit them. That wasn't his intention. I think one of the most common experiences of parents is suddenly finding that our children have taken us more seriously than we ever intended to, and are therefore doing things that we never wanted them to do.
We sat on the stoop all night long. Much of the time we said nothing, and even our talk was in bits and snatches. Sometimes I listened to Huddle, and sometimes she listened to me. I tried using reason to convince her how unreasonable it was, and she tried using reason to convince me that reason had nothing to do with it.
Sholem Aleichem ascribes to this father, to Tevye, many of the things that were happening to him in his life. Here's a father who has many children to support. Sholem Aleichem was a father who had many children to support, and his children were growing up in a world very different from his own. There are dozens and dozens of works about the conflict between generations. But Sholem Aleichem, I believe, is the only major European writer who writes about this from the parents' point of view. The anchoring figure is Tevye.
Tevye is not a shtetl Jew at all. Tevye lives out in the countryside, out in the middle of nowhere in the original stories. He has no rabbinical authority upon whom to rest. He has no Jews around him that he can ask about what to do. So when these incredible challenges of the modern world confront him, he's got to figure out for himself how you adapt and how you make accommodation for all of this. Because he's like the do-it-yourself Jew, which means he's the ultimate modern, or to put it more accurately, he's the precursor for us. Right, here we all are. Every day of our lives, we're figuring out, all right, so we've got a tradition here. What do I want to retain? What do I want to discard? How do I want to reorganize all this? How do I want to redefine this? And that's what Tevye was doing for himself. He had no community to look to. There was no shtetl who was going to define him.
Is oben in der Heuch, sag ich, und wir sind da in der Erde, tief, tief in der Erde. Here there's a kind of a pun. Tevye says, God is up there in heaven, and we are down here on the earth. But the Yiddish expression to be in the earth, sein in der Erde, also means, am I allowed to use an expletive here? No. It also means to be up Schitt's Creek.
In the tale of Tevye's third daughter, Chava, the stories darken as Sholem Aleichem grapples with a powerful new threat beginning to challenge East European Jewry.
The third daughter is going to intermarry at a time, of course, when the Russians were not allowed to convert to Judaism. So intermarriage meant that the Jewish girl would have to convert to Christianity, which is what Chava does.
Chava goes off and she marries a non-Jew. His name is Chviedke Galagan. Galagan means hooligan. So the author is telling you his own point of view here. But Chviedke Galagan is aspiring to be something much more. In the story he says, Der Schreiber Chviedke Galagan, the writer Chviedke Galagan. He's a modern. He, like Chava, is aspiring to a more modern, more enlightened world, and that's what they share in common. In fact, how do they even get together? They're sharing books all the time.
I came home one evening to find Fiedke, the scribe, a tall young goy, talking to my third daughter, Chava. As soon as he saw me, he about-faced, tipped his hat, and took off. What was Fiedke doing here? I asked Chava. I'd feel better if you and he were friendlier at a distance. Just think of who you are and who he is. God, says my Chava, created us all equal. So he did, I say. He created man in his likeness. But you better remember that every likeness is not alike.
The very next day, she elopes with Fiedke. But the story's not really about intermarriage as such. It's about something much more profound even than that. It's about universalism. If universalism the universality of all mankind, all humankind, is really a Jewish value, then why do we continue to distinguish ourselves? Why do we continue to set ourselves apart? Tevye decides they're going to sit Shiva. They're going to mourn as though she's died, or as he says, as though she never lived at all. And after a period, he finally goes back to work. And he starts going out to a country town to sell his milk and cream. And along the way, whom does he meet? Chava. She's been waiting for him. She's dying to talk to him. And she's waiting on the side of the road, and she runs out. She says, Tata, Tata, Daddy, Daddy, I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you.
My first thought was to climb down and grab her in my arms. But right away I thought again. What sort of a woman are you, Tevye? I asked myself. And I jerked the reins to the right and cried, Giddy up there, you moron! Well, no sooner did my horse veer to the right than Chava ran in front of it again, gesturing as if to say she had something to tell me. I could feel my heart split in two, and my arms and legs wouldn't obey me. But Tevye is no woman. Tevye put Satan behind him.
What Sholem Aleichem does at that point is really quite extraordinary. Tevye, whom he has presented all the time as a very lenient person, as a very accommodating person, as a father who loves his daughters more than anything. And no matter if they marry a revolutionary instead of the person whom he has wanted them to marry, he goes along with it. And what's more, he makes it look good in the eyes of his wife so that she accepts it too. But this third daughter, he cannot accept that, because if she becomes a Gentile, then that's the end of who he is. He refuses to stop for this daughter who has converted to Christianity.
He starts asking himself questions. He says, maybe and a whole bunch more maybe start flying through my head, he says. And I start wondering, I said, was is das a selbst Yid and was is nicht Yid? What does it really mean to have Jews and non-Jews? And why did God create Jews and non-Jews in the first place? If God really did create Jews and non-Jews, why should they be so divided, one from the other? And at this point, he says, Mr. Sholem Aleichem, he says, there's so much sorrow in this story, and there's so much embarrassment and shame in this story of everything I've told you. I don't want you to write about it. He says, you have to swear to me you won't write about this story. He says, on mir vergesst wie in Pusik steht, he says, as it says in the text of the Torah, he was forgotten. He says, Ois Tevye de Milchike, there is no more Tevye de Milchike.
Thank you. So that was just, I don't know if other people have seen the film, but that's just a portion of the film. And I just want to sort of elaborate a little on what you just saw and talk about one of the things that Ruth Weiss mentions in this portion is how much the Tevye stories reflect on Sholem Aleichem's life and the fact that he had 5 daughters. But I think that beyond that, there's an even larger way that these stories reflect on his life that deal with not just Sholem Aleichem the father, but Sholem Aleichem the young man. And I think the thing that makes these stories so great, probably the greatest thing he ever wrote, is because of this tension that's inherent in these stories. I guess one of the things to start off by saying is that as Belle Kaufman, his granddaughter, says, there was a real Tevye, right? There was a Tevye character. There was a milkman. Sholem Aleichem lived in Kiev for many years, and he summered in a place called Boyarka, which is a little suburb of Kiev that he calls Boybarik in the Tevye stories. And there was a guy who delivered milk, as Belle said. What we don't mention in the film is, and I get this from David Roskis, who's also in the film, although you don't see him in this section, is the very first time that Sholem Aleichem writes about Tevye. He writes about him really as a buffoon. He writes about him as from a point of view where we're kind of laughing at him, right? He's a silly, impoverished man. That's the first time Tevye makes his appearance in these stories. But as you see what happened, and going to what Hillel Halkin says, by the time these stories develop and over the 20 years he writes him, Tevye becomes anything but that. He always maintains this kind of silliness, but it's the same silliness that we all have a core of. And he becomes a much, much deeper, more three-dimensional, powerful figure. And this is a great leap for Sholem Aleichem, because as earlier, the first great character he creates, Menachem Mendel, and Menachem Mendel, who appears briefly in the second Sholem Aleichem story, and is conceived a couple of years before the first Sholem Aleichem story, never outgrows being a kind of funny dunce that we can all laugh at. Tevye, of course, grows much greater than that, much deeper than that, much broader than that. And I think this is what makes him a great figure, but not only is there the identification between Sholem Aleichem and Tevye, there is the identification between Sholem Aleichem and the young men who take away his daughters. And that's often the secret to how great the drama and tragedy of these stories are. I know it's a little dangerous. You're playing with fire when you try to be too biographical, when you try to read too much of a man's life into stories that are art and that have been transmogrified, that have been shape-shifted into something different. But nonetheless, there are hints and clues in here that I think show us certain things. The first thing is the first man who takes away his oldest daughter, Tzaitel, and Tzaitel means time in Yiddish, is a man named Motel, another Motel, the tailor. And Motel, what connects in Sholem Aleichem's own life with Motel is that they marry for love, right? This is a love match, as they say in the thing. It's not a match based on who the father wants you to marry. And of course, in Sholem Aleichem's own life, his own wife, Olga, was a love match. He had gone to tutor Olga and fell in love with her against the father's wishes and stole her away from the father. So each of these sons-in-law who come along and steal a daughter away from Sholem Aleichem, or from Tevye, I should say, is really also not only Sholem Aleichem feeling his daughter's being pulled away from him, but has got to be some kind of projection of the young Sholem Aleichem who did this to his father-in-law. So in the first case, it's about love. The second one goes a little step further because each story represents yet another progression of what's going on in the modern world. The second one is Perchik. He's the radical that they talk about. He's the socialist. He actually is a tutor. Like Sholem Aleichem himself, he's a tutor. The first guy, Motel, is just a tailor. He happens to be in the vicinity. But this man is actually a tutor, and he's invited in by Tevye to tutor his daughter, Hodel in this case, just as Loyev, I can't remember Loyev's first name, invites Sholem Aleichem in to tutor his daughter, Olga. And Olga's Yiddish name, of course, is Hodel, which of course is the name of the second daughter who Perchik marries and takes away. So clearly there's something going on there. The third daughter, who's Chava, Eve, of course, marries Chvedka Galagan. And this is, how possibly can this be in any way a stand-in for Sholem Aleichem? And obviously this is the marriage he cannot go along with. In the Tevye stories, in fact, Tevye never reconciles with Chava after she marries him. It's only in Fiddler on the Roof, the Americanized version of this, that we get a nice happy ending and Tevye blesses them in the end. This never happens in the real stories. Nonetheless, what can this have to do with Sholem Aleichem? Well, the fact is that when Sholem Aleichem met Olga, one of the things he was tutoring her in was literature and Russian. The language they spoke was Russian. The exchange, the communication took place in Russian literature. This is exactly the same thing that brings Chvedka and Chava together. And one of the shocking ironies about Sholem Aleichem is he spoke in his own life, in his own home, Russian. And Russian was such a native language that, in fact, none of his daughters or sons ever spoke Yiddish. He didn't teach his own children Yiddish. Really. It's shocking. So even though there is, and again, this involves tensions, and there are many things going on in this stories, but clearly something is going on there with Sholem Aleichem in his own mind, that there's a slippery slope happening here, right? And even though this man is literally beyond the pale, not just figuratively because he's a Christian, and in that point in time you were forced to convert, right? Nowadays when there's intermarriage, and I'm a happily intermarried man to a lovely Italian woman who's over there, my wife is not, she didn't force me to convert to Catholicism. In fact, she doesn't even like Catholicism. Not that there's anything wrong with Catholicism. But in those days, you had to literally give up one tradition for another, and we saw in the will how that was something that someplace he couldn't go. Nonetheless, I think that you see again a tension that he understood in his own life, that he had in some ways goyified his own children, right? Because they spoke a goyish language. They didn't speak Yiddish, they spoke Russian. The final two daughters that are not in Fiddler on the Roof, and I don't talk about in the film here, are Sprinza and Belka. Sprinza, and if you remember at the beginning of the Tevye stories, it's all about if I were a rich man, as they say in Fiddler on the Roof. It's all about wanting wealth. And each time he's upset, right? He wanted his first daughter Tzeitel to marry Laser Wolf, who's a relatively wealthy butcher, and instead he gets the poor tailor. Finally, Sprinza is courted by a wealthy young Jew. And Tevye's a little worried about this, a little wary about what would a wealthy Jew want with a poor Jew. And he's very nervous about this, but yet again, he invites him into his own home because this is the pattern. The man comes to meet him for a Shavuos lunch of blintzes, falls in love with Sprinza, courts her, again without Tevye knowing about this, falls in love with her, and then probably gets her pregnant, and then his mother, his wealthy mother who he's living with, takes him away. And so Sprinza is jilted, and Sprinza ends up committing suicide. The final daughter also marries a wealthy man, a man named Podhutzar, who's the kind of a Jewish Donald Trump. He's a wealthy contractor and builder. He did not run for mayor of Kiev. But anyway, he was a wealthy man, and finally this match takes. But yet there's another irony here, and the irony is that Podhutzar, because he's a wealthy man, wants him and his daughter to have nothing to do with Tevye, the poor cheesemaker, as he calls him. So when Tevye, he summons Tevye to him in what Sholem Aleichem calls Yehupitz, which is the name for Kiev. And the reason he calls, by the way, Kiev, he always refers to as Yehupitz, is because legally Jews were not allowed to live in Kiev. So he gives it another name. Anyway, he's summoned to meet Podhutzar and his daughter Belka in Yehupitz. And at first the butler won't even let him in because he looks like he's in rags. Finally he convinces the maid to let him in. And Podhutzar brings him there to tell him that it's not good for him to have a father-in-law like Tevye. So he wants to give him money, so he flees, so he goes to America. And then Tevye says, I don't want to go to America. So he says, okay, go to Palestine, but basically get lost. So you have this terrible irony, this very sad irony here, that the wish that initially Tevye starts off with, and Sholem Aleichem had that wish too, right? Sholem Aleichem, in fact, did become extremely wealthy, only to lose his money very, very quickly, and inherited his father-in-law's wealth and lost it immediately. As great as his talent for writing was, he had an equal talent, and we saw it here, for losing money. And in any case, a lot of this, by the time he's writing these stories, Sholem Aleichem has been to America already. And for anyone who knows, again, about Sholem Aleichem, he had a terrible time both of the times he came here. He came here once in 2005 hoping to be a great playwright. He was a terrible failure. He flees back to Europe, and then because of World War I, he's forced to come back again. And he spends his last year and a half of his life here, as we were told earlier. The stories Sholem Aleichem writes about America are very, very acerbic. He really had an enormous dislike for America, and one of the reasons he disliked it so much was he saw, like so many other Jews did, particularly religious Jews, he saw the wealth and the mobility absolutely corroding Jewish life and Jewish tradition. And so he really writes about it in pretty darkly satirical ways about people. America is a land that you're so free you're allowed to die in the street, things like this. So the wealth here in these last stories are a lot about how corrosive, how wealth actually freezes out one's Jewish fellow feeling, right? The corrosion is happening inside. It's not just a Gentile coming in and stealing your daughter. It's that money seeping inside to Jewish life that somehow is corroding our communal feeling. Nonetheless, again, the great thing, and I just want to end with this, the great thing about Sholem Aleichem was, and what made him such a superb writer, was this enormous capacity for empathy. And what he's able to do, despite this, at the same time he's writing these final, very dark stories about Tevye, and the final Tevye story, Tevye is literally a homeless, wandering Jew. He doesn't come to America in the stories. He's wandering. He has no idea where he's going. But at the same time he's doing that, and at the same time he realizes he's ill because he comes down with tuberculosis, I think in his early 50s, and realizes he has a very short time left to live. He also at that moment chooses to write 2 more novels, or 2 more great works, which are his final great works. One is called Funim Yarid, and Funim Yarid is his biography about the young Sholem Aleichem, and the other is Motel, the cantor's son. And what's fascinating about these in terms, again, of Sholem Aleichem in his own biography, obviously, Funim Yarid is a biography. So, and it's written in a very light, very funny style about the young, impish Sholem Aleichem. But what he does then with Motel, which is really, really remarkable, is that he basically, if you look at the Motel stories, they're really yet another kind of transmogrification of the Sholem Aleichem character into a new character. So he takes that youth, his own youth, and he makes himself a young boy on his way to America. And what Motel is capable of doing is exactly what Sholem Aleichem never could do. What Motel is able to do is take advantage of America in all the ways Sholem Aleichem couldn't. In all the ways Sholem Aleichem was a failure in America and saw himself and felt himself as a failure, Motel, we understand, is that young boy who's adaptable, who's flexible, who learns everything from chewing bubble gum to going on the subways, all these things. And so we're left at the end of his life, and this novel was left unfinished because he died, but we're left with a vision of Sholem Aleichem, a vision of himself, I think, of the young Sholem Aleichem transported into the body of this young boy who's going to take advantage of America, and he sees beyond. America ceases to be just the land of wealth and competition and greed. He's able to see through his own illness and sadness and disappointment, he's able to see what America really can do for Jews. And Motel will become that. He'll become us. He'll become the new American Jewish community, and his ability to see that, to foresee that, and to embrace it at that moment is exactly why he was the great writer he was. Thank you very much.
Thanks, that was terrific. I absolutely hope that you will all run out and find yourself a way to see the rest of that movie, because it's a fantastic movie. It's just got insight upon insight, and it evokes. It's called Laughing in the Darkness, and I don't know if it's going to be screened anymore, but I know it's available on DVD in the library because I got one. Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. Absolutely. So, now to our first reading from Sholem Aleichem's actual works. Rachmiel Peltz has been involved with Yiddish in Philadelphia for decades. He's the founding director of Judaic Studies at Drexel and a professor of sociolinguistics. He's taught Yiddish, sociolinguistics, and also microbiology at Columbia, Boston University, Mount Holyoke College, University of Massachusetts, University of Pennsylvania, and he's also taught at YIVO, the Yiddish Research Institute in New York. His book, From Immigrant to Ethnic Culture, American Yiddish in South Philadelphia, was published in 1998 and is a fascinating read. Rachmiel? Is Rachmiel here? There he is. The floor is yours.
this one?
You're both on.
As you know, the saying, Eder hebon zu reden, will ich sagen a paar Wörter. This is not a simple event, and events don't just happen. I know a little bit about how much planning it takes to pull something like this off. So I want certainly to give full credit to Avremel, Andy Cassell, for what he's done here. Andy is an amazing Yiddish expert. If all of us remember that beautiful Sunday Inquirer feature that he wrote about Bob and Molly Friedman some 22 years ago, which was at the beginning of his Yiddish career. And when we talk about his Yiddish career, I think we have to certainly give credit to his master teacher, Mordechai Alsher, who you heard before. And so if we didn't have Mordechai, we wouldn't get Andy, and we wouldn't be here today. But certainly Andy has achieved a lot. This Haverford Yiddish Culture Festival is also no small miracle. We came back to Philadelphia after 11 years in Northampton, Massachusetts in 1996, and I cannot think of a more heartfelt, serious way to remember a colleague, Seth Brody, than the founding of this Yiddish festival by some of my heroes. Dan Gillis, who was not here today, Ihm zu langen gesunde Jahr, just an amazing creative builder. Mel Santer, whom I've known from the time I was a kid, a molecular biologist at the University of Pennsylvania, so devoted. Jeff Tukoski Feldman, who does most of the, not a little thing, but does most of the work here, and certainly now also joined by Sid Perlow. It's the longest ongoing living Yiddish institution today in Philadelphia, and we should really give this group a lot of credit. If you sit here long enough, you can really write your talk. So I've been sitting and I've been changing things. I realize that I am here as the Yoirish von Sholem Aleichem. Ich bin a Kind von der Sholem Aleichem Sholem. I really didn't think about that in preparing today. For 5 years, every day, for an hour, I went into a building called Sholem Aleichem Shul 45 on 174th Street and Weeks Avenue in the Bronx. Walking distance, I'd say, a couple of miles from Vise Avenue, where Sholem Aleichem lived and died. But another world in the 1950s. We've just been listening to a little bit of literary criticism, and I was fortunate enough to be a graduate student of Don Miron's, and I could tell you just how impressionable and every class on Sholem Aleichem in graduate school, it was like each class was like going to the opera. However, there are some other Yorshim, there are some other inheritors of Sholem Aleichem besides the literary critics that you saw and you have heard about today so far. And one of the groups are the Yiddish educators, let's say, who founded the Sholem Aleichem Folk Institute. And my school at that time, right, this is some 40, 50 years or so, I don't know, after Sholem Aleichem, what were they trying to do? Now, the big subjects in the Sholem Aleichem Shul were, I said every day we went there, was Jewish history and Yiddish literature. And when we learned Yiddish literature, it was not literary criticism, it was literature from the Kishkes, because we learned it by heart. We learned Sholem Aleichem zu deklamieren. And when man kann deklamieren, vergesst man das Kemel nicht. And it comes from insides. But in those 50s and even in the 60s, these latter-day Yiddish schools, and then I was fortunate enough to finish a Yiddish Mittelschule von dem Sholem Aleichem Folk Institute und Zionistischen Arbeiterverband. These educators were looking at something much, much wider and much, much deeper than the literary critics, my teachers that you saw on the film. They were actually looking for the whole thing, the whole way of life. And at that time, they took Sholem Aleichem, and what was going on in our schools was not reading Sholem Aleichem's literature, but it was a movement called Traditionalisieren. They were traditionalizing. So the big day of the week was Shabbos in those secular schools. Friday, we did everything with Sholem Aleichem, and that's what Sholem Aleichem was about. He was looking at the whole picture. You heard it from his will. We were saying Kiddush, we were saying everything. Zmiris, we were doing the whole Shabbos based on tradition. And that's what those people were putting back into the secular life in the 1950s. Well, I actually came here to do a job, and I'm going to read you something, but I have to admit to you that I've stolen this material. Ich habe das begann wird, nicht von Sholem Aleichem, nur von Emerson Anders. And when you're in Philadelphia and you mention the word Sholem Aleichem and the name Sholem Aleichem, you don't think of his last appearance, I think, in 1916, but you think of something else. And this is probably, Philadelphia Jews, I've lived here enough to know, don't really value their specific tradition enough. But the most outstanding local Jewish organization ever to be created in American Jewish history was created right here, and that was Del Sholem Aleichem Club. And Del Sholem Aleichem Club, we have at least two members here, the Kleiners, right? And probably more, right? Garfinkel, probably a few more also. And Han and myself, before we moved to Northampton, we were members for 10 years. And let me tell you what a Sholem Aleichem Club meeting was like. Well, first of all, it was a monthly meeting, but it was very connected to those traditionalists of the 1950s in the Yiddish schools, because the people from the Sholem Aleichem Club were very, very concerned about the future of the Jewish community and the future of Jewish life. And they also wanted more than just literary criticism or learning of texts. 1 month's meeting was on Jewish culture, usually on Yiddish. Some of the best speakers, we were talking about Yosef Bulov would come. And then the second month was something else. It was politics and social issues, right? Zu schaffen, zu kämpfen für eine schönere und eine bessere Welt. And they saw this as all connected. And at the end of every meeting was the most important part, folk dancing. And that's no joke. And dancing, that's what I'm saying, dancing. Dancing yourselves. What else do you need, right? Yiddish literature, politics, societal improvement, and folk dancing. What else does one need? And these were the Yorshim. So who did I steal this from? I stole this from one of my Rabbeim. Some of you know him, one of the most creative Yiddishists in America, Max Rosenfeld. My teacher, Max Rosenfeld. And I'm going to read to you what I learned at some of the wonderful performances of the Sholem Aleichem Club. They also put on these creative, amazing plays with music and dancing and amazing stuff. They're available. They're in the archives. Someday Jewish America will realize the impact. Max found, because Max was a reader, in the Sholem Aleichem Buch, der Edem Judalef Berkowitsch hat herausgegeben in 1926 zum 10. Yortzayt von Sholem Aleichem ein Buch, was hat geheißen das Sholem Aleichem Buch. Und Sholem Aleichem hat dort in einem Buch, das heißt, hat es nicht geschrieben, es ist gemacht im Ganzen seiner Brief. It's mostly his letters that they've collected, and also pieces of paper, little notes, lecture notes. And in there is something that's called Unser Loschen. Right? So we're 1926, Sholem Aleichem 1916. What does Unser Loschen mean? Think of Unser Loschen in 1916 versus Unser Loschen in 2016. The Loschen and the Unser, who are we? not the same Jews. This is cataclysmic, the difference from 1916 to 2016 in saying this is our language. And Sholem Aleichem was in love, had a love affair with Yiddish, and these are just some of his notes that I'm going to read to you. I can't do it as well as Max did it, but I'll try. So, as he would say, das Beste, right? These are just little notes on superlatives, okay? And this is what the whole piece is, Yiddish life. It's not just in the words, it's in your Weltbanem, your understanding of how people work and how society works. So, we know gut, besser, das Beste. Now, Sholem Aleichem says, das versteht man, right? That we understand. When I finally get to these superlatives, I'm going to read them first in English, so that when I read the Yiddish, you will understand it perfectly. Then go English, Yiddish, not the way we've been hearing it. Sagt auf Deutsch, relativ groß, komparativ größer, superlativ noch größer. Oder stark, starker, noch starker. Auf Französisch. Grand, plus grand, le plus grand. Oder fort, le plus fort. Italienisch. Grande, grandissimo. Oder forto, fortissimo. Oder Schach. Was darf ihr mehr? Nehmt schon nur die coolste Sprache auf der Welt. Here I'm going to give you an example from the simplest language in the world. The language that Dr. Zamenhof hat geschrieben, Ludwig Zamenhof der Jid, hat ausgetracht Esperanto. Right? Sholem Aleichem, Esperanto. Grande, ple grande. Forto, Fliforto, Fleiforto. Aber das alles kommt nicht zu unser Yiddish. But none of that stuff can compare to superlatives in our Yiddish. Okay, and here goes with the examples. Groß, größer, a Bäum. Stark, starker, an Eisen. Klug, klieger, a Mamser. Karg, I'm sorry. Strong, stronger, an iron. Smart, smarter, a bastard. Okay? Stingy, stingier, a pig. Karg, karger, a chazer. Mild, milder, a charlatan. Mild, milder, a charlatan. Fat, fatter, a pudding. Fett, fetter, a kugel. Slim, slimmer, a dog. Mager, magerer, a hund. Wide, wider, a barrel. Breit, breiter, a fass. White, whiter, fallen snow. Weiß, weißer, gefallener Schnee. Black, blacker, a tomcat. Schwarz, schwarzer, a kutter. Green, greener, vinegar. Green, greener, Essig. Blue, bluer, a spleen. Bläu, bläuer, a milz. Yellow, yellower, wax. Gel, geller, wax. Rich, richer, stuffed. Reich, reicher, ungestoppt. Good, better, without a goal, right? Gut, besser, ohne Gaul. Bad, worse, a hummen. Schlecht, ärger, a hummen. Pretty, prettier, a gold. Shane, schöner, a gold. Ugly, uglier, a death. Mies, mieser, a toit. Hard, harder, a bone. Hart, harter, a bane. Soft, softer, butter. Weg, wecher, a putter. Wet, wetter, to wring out. Nass, nasser, auszudrehen. Dry, drier, pepper. Trocken, trockener, Pfeffer. Cold, colder, an angel. Kalt, kälter, a malach. Warm, warmer, an ear. Warm, warmer, an oil. Hot, hotter, a bath. Heiß, heißer, a bod. Longer comparatives. A bissele, he says, längliche Komparativen. Hungry, hungrier, a whole day, nothing in the mouth. Hungrig, hingeriger, a ganzen Tag in Maul nicht gehabt. Thirst, thirstier, fall with your face in the ground. Durstig, durstiger, fällt mit den Ponnen zerdreht. Pale, paler, a prettier one you bury in the ground. Blass, blasser, a schönerin legt mit dreht. Naked, more naked, as mother had her. Nacket, nacketer, wie die Mama hat ihm gehabt. Innocent, more innocent, milk him completely. Unschuldig, unschuldiger, hat Milk im Eis. Foolish, foolisher, salt him in pickles and marinate him in sauerkraut. Narisch, narischer, hat salz him in ugelkis, hat marinier him in kreut. And now very short comparatives, ganz kurze comparatives. Possible, more possible, what's the connection? Meglich, meglicher, was ist scheich? Certain, more certain, there's no other like this. Gewiss, gewisser, noch amin. Correct, corrector, with certainty. Richtig, richtiger, avader. A lot, more, ps. Viel, mehrer, ps. A dank.
Wow. It shows you what a gold mine Sholem Aleichem's work is. I next want to invite Ellen Cassidy to come up. Ellen comes to us from Washington, D.C. She used to live in Philadelphia, where she wrote a column for the Philadelphia Daily News. You may remember from quite a while back. Ellen began studying Yiddish 25 years ago as a memorial to her mother. She enrolled in the continuing education program at Gratz, where her first teachers were the late Max Rosenfeld, Mark Mule mentioned, and Mark Alsher, who was here. She got her start as a translator when Max Rosenfeld handed her a book of short stories that had been inscribed to him by the author Bluma Lempel. This fall, that collection of Bluma Lempel's stories that Ellen translated with a colleague will be published. The title is Oedipus in Brooklyn and Other Stories. And she's now finishing up a year as a translation fellow at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst. She also has a book that she wrote that you can buy here if you want to, called We Are Here, Memories of the Lithuanian Holocaust, which is a remarkable essay of personal discovery and of current socio-political, cultural things in Lithuania that I highly recommend. Anyway, Ellen, come.
Thanks so much. I first encountered the story Mir ist gut, ich bin a Yosem, lucky me, I'm an orphan, in Yiddish as a student at the Vilnius Yiddish Institute in 2004. And I had to really struggle to understand it. I thumbed my dictionary till the binding broke. But even so, I felt that this story had been written just for me. There was something about its deep loyalty to a child's point of view, its refusal to hew to a correct adult line about death that seemed to speak right to my heart. The story is told by the 9-year-old boy Muttel, whose father has just died. Is he sad? Not in so many words. Does he weep? No. Well, in fact, he does weep once. He cries in the story, but not explicitly, not out of grief. Is he scared? Does he miss his father? The genius of Sholem Aleichem is that the boy's vivacious energy and his sunny, irrepressible nature come through loud and strong, while the sadness, the fear, the grief, all of that is there, but expressed only indirectly with great subtlety. We have the laughter and the tears, the adult understanding and the child's innocence, interwoven in a way that seems natural, effortless, and timeless. And this story appears early in the book Muttel Pesi dem Chazens, Muttel, the son of the cantor Pesi. And Sholem Aleichem wrote this work in two chunks, in 1907 to 1908, and then again in 1916, shortly before he died. In fact, the book ends in mid-sentence. And in preparing for today, I looked into some literary criticism of this work, and I found that the scholars take this piece as a metaphor. Pesi, the boy's father, stands for the Eastern European civilization that is dying. And the Jews, orphaned by this death, like Muttel, are freed from the strictures of the suffocating shtetl culture. And now they're free to join the modern world. Muttel is a Moses who chronicles an exodus out of the slavery of the old world to a new life in the new world. So see what you think. I'm going to start out with the couple of opening paragraphs in Yiddish, and then I'll read the whole story from the beginning to the end in English. And it's just a few pages, it's a short story. Mir ist gut, ich bin a Yosem. Von sind ich bin zu mein Seichel gekommen, gedenk ich nicht, ich soll sein a sa mijuches wie a sind. Was ist mit mir der Jiches? Mein Tate, Pesi der Hasen, ist gestorben, dem ersten Tag Schwurs, und ich bin geblieben a Yosem. Von dem ersten Tag nach Schwurs haben wir angehäuben sagen Kaddisch, ich und mein Bruder Elia. Tage hat mich ausgelernt sagen Kaddisch. Mein Bruder Elia ist ein getreuer Bruder, aber nicht kein guter Rebbe. Ist ein Kaisen, schlägt sich. Hat aufgeöffnet das Siddur und hat sich weggesetzt mit mir und hat angehäuben mit mir studieren. Wie es Gadol, wie es Kadash, Shmei Rabo. Will, als ich, soll schon kennen äußern wenig. Haset über mit mir noch einmal und noch einmal, von Anheb bis ins Sof, und heißt mir, als jetzt soll ich schon sagen allein. Ich sage allein, aber es geht nicht. Bis V'yatzmach Purkane ist noch wie es ist. Und kommt zu V'yatzmach Purkane, verzeppet ich mich. Der langt mir mit den Ellenbeugen und sagt mir, als der Kopf ist mir upon ergens in Drößen, gleich wie getroffen. Freut sich nicht und hasert ein mit mir noch einmal. Ich hab mich kaum erschlagen bis leelo veelo und weiter nicht der Trott. Nimmt mich an für ein Euer und sagt, als der Tate soll aufstehen und sehen, was für ein Sohn hat. Ich entweder wollte ich für Sport sagen Kaddish. Lucky me, I'm an orphan. Never before in my life have I been the privileged character I am now. And why is this? Because my father, Pacey the cantor, died on the first day of Shavuos, and I was left an orphan. The first day after Shavuos, my brother and I began saying Kaddish. My brother Elia taught me how. My brother Elia is a good brother, but a rotten teacher. He's quick to get angry, and he beats me. That first day after Shavuos, he opened the prayer book, sat me down, and began teaching me the words, Yes Gadol, V'Yes Kadash, Shemei Rabo. He expected me to learn by heart right away. We repeated it again and again from beginning to end, and then he told me to say it by myself. I tried, but I couldn't do it. The first few lines went fine, but after that, I kept getting stuck. Elia poked me with an elbow and said my mind must be elsewhere. How did he guess? But he didn't give up. He repeated it with me again, but again, after a few lines, I got stuck and couldn't go on. Elia grabbed me by the ear and said, Papa should only rise from his grave and see what a son he had. Then I wouldn't have to say Kaddish, I said. For this, I got a good smack on the cheek. Hearing the noise, my mother cried, For the love of God, what are you doing? Have you forgotten that the boy is an orphan? I sleep with my mother now in my father's bed, the only piece of furniture left in the house. She lets me have most of the blanket. Cover yourself and go to sleep, you poor child, she says to me. I only wish I could give you something to eat. I cover myself, but I can't fall asleep. I keep repeating the words of the Kaddish to myself. I'm not going to hate her these days. I'm not learning anything. I'm not praying. I'm not singing in the choir. Mir ist gut. Ich bin a Yosem. Congratulate me. I know the whole Kaddish by heart. In the synagogue, I stand on a bench and rattle it off like crazy. I have a terrific voice that I inherited from my father, a real soprano. All the boys are jealous. The women weep when they hear me, and some of the men give me a kopek. Yossi, the Nogid's son, stands right in front of me and sticks out his tongue to make me laugh, but just to spite him, I won't. One time, Aaron the shamus caught him at it and grabbed him by the ear and threw him out the door. Served him right. I am free. I spend all day by the river, swimming and fishing. I've figured out how to catch fish, and if you like, I'll teach you too. You take off your shirt, make a knot in the sleeve, and wade into the water up to your neck. You keep going for a long time. When the shirt gets heavy, that means it's full. Then you get right out, shake out the weeds and mud, and look carefully inside. Tangled in the weeds, you'll sometimes find a few tadpoles. These you can throw back. It's a pity to let them die. Sometimes there's a leech. These are worth money, 3 groschen for a dozen. You can forget about fish, though. There used to be fish, but not anymore. I don't mind. I'd be happy with just leeches. But this summer, I haven't caught a single one. Don't ask how my brother Elia found out I've been fishing. He almost pulled my ear off. Luckily, Fat Pessia, our neighbor, saw him. She watches out for me like a mother. Is that any way to treat an orphan? She cried. My brother Elia was so ashamed that he let go of my ear. Everybody sticks up for me these days. Mir ist gut. Ich bin a Yosem. Fat Pessia is in love with me. She keeps asking my mother if I can go and live at her house. Why not, she asks. I have 12 at the table already. He'll be one more. She almost got my mother to say yes, but my brother Elia spoke up. Who will see to it that he says Kaddish, he said. I will, said Pessia. Isn't that good enough? Pessia is not a rich woman. Her husband is a bookbinder named Moshe, very good at his job. But being good is not enough. You need luck, too. That's what Pessia tells my mother. My mother agrees, but she says you need luck in any case, even when you're unlucky. Look at me, for example. Here I am, an orphan, and everybody wants me. Some are even willing to keep me for good, but my mother swears that as long as she's alive, she won't give me up. She bursts out crying and asks my brother Elia what to do. She says, "What do you think? Should we let him stay at Pesya's?" My brother is practically a grown-up. That's why my mother is asking his advice. He strokes his chin as if he had a beard. "By all means," he says, like a grown-up, "just so long as he behaves himself." And it's agreed. I'll go and live at Pesya's for the time being, on condition that I behave myself and don't do anything naughty. What is naughty? Tying a piece of paper to the cat's tail to make her go around and around in circles. That's naughty. Rattling a stick along the fence around the priest's house to make his dog start barking. That's naughty. Pulling the cork out of the water carrier's tank so half the water runs out. That's naughty. "Lucky for you, you're an orphan," says Leibka, the water carrier. "If you weren't, believe me, I'd break every bone in your body." I do believe him, and I also know he'd never lay a hand on an orphan. Mir is gut, ich bin a Yossem. Pardon me for saying so, but our neighbor Pesya told a big lie. She said she had 12 mouths to feed, but by my count, I'm the 14th. She must have forgotten blind Uncle Borech. Or maybe she didn't count him because he has no teeth. It's true that he can't chew, but he can still swallow. He grabs all the food he can get and swallows like a goose. Everyone else grabs too, me included, and for that, they kick me under the table. Vashti kicks the hardest. His real name is Herschel, but they call him Vashti. Everyone in this house has a nickname. Pinny is Barrel because he's round and fat. Chaim is Shaggy, so he's called Buffalo. Mendel with the pointy nose is Sharp Nose. Beryl is Give Me More. Even the cat, poor innocent creature, has a nickname. I have a nickname too, Lippy. They don't like my lips. They say I smack my lips when I eat. I'd like to see a person who can eat without smacking his lips. I'm not someone who takes offense easily, but this nickname I can't stand. They use it all the time just to torment me, and nothing can make them stop. "Where have you been, Lippy? Wipe your nose, Lippy." It annoys me so much that I start crying. Their father, Pesya's husband, Moishe the bookbinder, notices me. "Why are you crying?" he says. "My name is Muttel," I answer, "and they call me Lippy." "Who?" he says. "Vashti," I say. He went to beat Vashti, but Vashti said it was Barrel, and Barrel said it was Buffalo. And so it went. One blamed another, and the other blamed a third. It was like a circle with no end. At last, their father lined them all up and gave each one of them a good spanking with the cover of a prayer book. "You rascals," he cried, "I'll teach you how to make fun of an orphan. You see, they all took their licks because of me. Everybody sticks up for me. Mir is gut, ich bin a Yossem."
Okay. Well, now we have a very special treat. We've heard a little bit about Sholem Aleichem's stories and his essays and his plays and his notes. He also wrote a couple of songs, and these songs became so popular in Eastern Europe, in the world of the shtetl, that they eventually entered the canon as folk songs. And if you can actually find people making reference to these, and they were printed as folk songs. And here to perform them for us is cantor Naomi Hirsch, a singer and choral leader who conducts the Workman's Circle Chorus here in Philadelphia. She's a cantor with master's degree in sacred music from Hebrew Union College, has studied with leading Yiddish song interpreters, and performed in Germany and Austria, as well as the Kennedy Center in Washington, the Center for Jewish History in New York, the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, and at Drexel University. She teaches Hebrew, liturgy, cantillation, and Jewish music. And she's now going to show us why these songs became so popular. Do you want this mic?
Schlechte kommen und verbeiten, ständig liebe gute Zeiten. Noch ein Sommer steht schon hinten, bald der Häuschen mit der Winden. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, weil der Rebbe schmeißt Geseder. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, und der kann schickt recht die Beiner, leben aber will nicht keiner. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder. Und steht schon da nicht weit, der Behelfer bei der Seite, mit der Stecken an Lanternen, eingesunken soll werden. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, weil der Rebbe schmeißt Geseder. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, und er kann schickt recht die Beine, lernen, aber will nicht keiner. Will nicht gehen in Cheder.
We can do it together. So the refrain is, will nicht gehen in Cheder, because the Rebbe schmeißt, the Rebbe whips us. And the kanchik, the whip, drescht die Beine, it hurts the bones. Yeah. And anyway, that's how it goes.
And I so didn't want to go to school that I left out the last verse, so we'll do an encore. Because I want to go ice skating, which we almost were able to do yesterday. Ein zu Eufen Eis, das Eis ist glatt, der Schnee ist weiß, will sich glitschen a Katoves, und tut uns mit für Oves. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, weil der Rebbe schmeißt Geseder. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder, und er kann schickt recht die Beine, leben aber will nicht keiner. Ich will nicht gehen in Cheder. Mein Kind, mein Trist, mein Schöne, schlaf schön, Juliu. Schlaf mein Leben, mein Kadeschene, schlaf schön, Juliu. Schlaf mein Leben, mein Kadeschene, schlaf schön, Sonnenju. Bei dein Wiegel sitzt dein Name, singt ein Lied und weint. Bester Moll, verstehn Miss Dame, dass sie hat gemeint. Bester Moll, verstehn Miss Dame, was sie hat gemeint. In Amerika ist der Tate, sagt men gura Glück, und für jeden Aganeden etwas an Antik. Und für jeden Aganeden etwas an Antik. Amerika ist für jeden. Dorten esst man in der Woche Chale zu den Jul. Ja, ich lech, will ich dir kochen. Schlaf, schlaf, liul, liul. Ja, ich lech, will ich dir kochen. Schlaf, schlaf, liul, liul. Wird schicken $20, sein Porträt dazu, und wird nehmen leben soll und sei hinzu. Und wird nehmen leben soll und sei hinzu. Bis kommt das gute Quittel, schlaf schön, Sonnen Jul. Schlafen ist ein Teiermittel, schlaf schön, schlaf, liul, liul. Schlafen ist ein Teiermittel, schlaf, mein Sohn.
Let's see. One more piece of the program I want to do. If we can get the stage back on here. Can I get the? There we go. We have one more presentation, but it's of a folk operetta, or what is called a folk operetta. Which I put together from a vinyl recording I found at Gratz College with the help of the librarian there, Nancy Nitzberg, who was here, did a wonderful job. It's a great example of how, even before Fiddler, people were trying to bring Sholem Aleichem's stories and characters to life for new audiences. This is an excerpt that was written for the 100th anniversary of Sholem Aleichem's birth in 1959, and performed by the Jewish People's Chorus, an organization that almost has a 100-year history of its own. It's a musical rendering of a piece of the second part of the stories that Ellen was reading from, Motel Pezi Dem Chazans. In the early part of that series, he's living in Kasrelivka, or he's living in Europe, and then he takes him to America for the second part. And the chapter takes, in the part that we'll hear the operetta from, he's on board an immigrant ship heading for Ellis Island. It's only got a 10-minute excerpt from an hour-long work, so you'll just have a taste. But it's a delightful taste, largely because the narrative role of Motel is played by Molly Pecan, it's another Philadelphia connection. Molly Pecan grew up here and made her debut at the Arch Street Theater in 1912. But before we listen to Molly, I want to make a confession. I want to explain why I'm here, or rather, what brought me to Sholem Aleichem in the first place. It was this fellow standing at the far left of the photo in front of his candy store in the Bronx. That's my grandfather. Sometime in 1907, when Sholem Aleichem was on his first trip to America, he met Baruch Chaim Kassel, standing there. And when Sholem Aleichem returned to Europe, they corresponded. And here is one of the letters that Sholem Aleichem sent to my Zeta. You can see it's in Yiddish, except for the name of a piece of an essay he wrote called The First Jewish Republic, which he was looking to have translated and published in the American English press. On the right is a close-up of the second page with Sholem Aleichem's signature at the bottom, and right above there he's signing off and sending greetings from his wife, and noting that his young son, Numa, with whom he had come to America the first time, and with whom he must have visited my grandpa's candy store, because Numa misses his ice cream lich. And in another letter, they got down to business discussing works that Sholem Aleichem hoped to have translated and published here. Unfortunately, I have no evidence my grandfather had a hand in arranging those publications, but this is the part of the letter I want to read you. I can only tell you, dear friend, this is Sholem Aleichem to my grandfather, when I was writing a summary for the English edition of the First Jewish the First Jewish Republic, was just in sketch form. In other words, it was still in my mind. Now that I've completed it, it looks much better than I expected from the author. It came out as a good-natured satire, not only of our national fragmentation and partisanship, but also of the universal foolishness that people call politics, class struggle, government, and other lovely names. But I thought that for a debut in English journalism, I should offer something more suitable. If you ask me from the point of view of pure art, I would of course recommend the humorous autobiography of my little boy, the cantor's son, to whom I have given a part of my personality. This underscores what Joe was saying earlier. Imagine, my little traveler is already on his way to America. His route, Brody, Lemberg, Krakow, Vienna, London, Southampton, New York. My God, such impressions, and his life in America, and all in a joyful tone, without a single tear. I'm useless as a weeper. I laugh, the reader laughs. And if at some point the reader should shed a tear, it's not my fault. Joyless reality, which the contemporary Jewish Gogol, or as they call me, Mark Twain, has to describe, is to blame. So you see the point. His humor was a vehicle, a way of dealing with the much darker subjects that dominated Jewish life in those times. Displacement, persecution, injustice, war. He was writing about all those things, like Larry David said, by making them small. So now Mottel, as re-envisioned by Molly Pecan and the Jewish People's Chorus. Let me sync that up. It's Sholem Aleichem with a lot of schmaltz, as you'll hear. You can say that about Fiddler and some of the other posthumous adaptations of his stories. Just to prepare you again, this takes place as the ship is nearing New York and the passengers are voicing their hopes and fears about the new land. At one point, you'll hear Mottel wish that he had a pencil and paper to sketch the scene. This is an interesting point that I noticed. Periodically in the story, he says, if I only had a pencil and a paper. And it's interesting that Sholem Aleichem made his character, his boy character, an artist, a visual artist. In some respects, I think it's because his own son, Numa, the one who missed my grandpa's ice cream lick, was in fact a visual artist. Numa grew up in the United States and became an artist and an art teacher in New York. He used the name Norman Rabin. He shortened the name from Rabinowitz, and he became known as a very influential art teacher. One of his most interesting students was another Jewish guy who changed his name from Bob Zimmerman to Bob Dylan. The little Sholem Aleichem trivia there. Okay, so let's see if I can make this work. You have librettos, by the way, they're in your packet.
Zusammen was mein Governmental sucht, als in Amerika seine nicht in Klassen. Nu, hat sich so lost. Mehr hat nicht bedarf.
Nicht kein Klassen, nicht kein Rassen, alle seinen Dorten gleich. Nicht kein Chilek zwischen keinem. Sie ist Orem, sie ist reich. Kein Klassen, kein Rassen, alle bleiben Behemoths und
eingemischt einer Passagier, ein ausgepitzter Giet mit der Wärtel, was wir riefen ihm der Heißener Schneider. Und hat gefragt bei uns Opinion, darf nicht narische Kasche. Mein Munefschach hat gefragt, sag Ganeiden, wie kann sein, Betlers, Schleppers, Präsidenten? Etwas klingt es gut nicht glattig. Und mein Bruder Elje hat ihm Ziege gebombt.
Erst die Burin, erst der Weiße, etwas klingt es gar nicht fein. Ich besser, was Breie, a Schneider Rot, a Grober Chayet. Und mir gefällt der Schneider Dafke, heut Ganeiden ist wie Scheich, Bettle Schleppers Präsidenten. In Ganeiden darf nicht sein, nicht ein Ohren, nicht kein Reich, nicht kein Prinzin, nicht kein Grafen. Gott hat alle gleich, Gott hat alle gleich verschaffen.
Also ich such doch Tage Pinje, keine Pinje pinkt auf Soi. Als in Columbus ist Medina, 40 Tage pinkt auf Soi. Der Heißener Schneider hat Sitz getinen gesucht. Jeden, Maunu Machaenu. Amerika kommt nicht unter so gering. Hat sich Pinje gekocht. Kann nicht leiden, als man sucht ein Krimwort auf sein Amerika. Steit schreit was hat uns zu tun mit Amerika, mit Columbus, mit Freiheit im Progress? Na, der Heißener Schneider tiet etwas am modernen Schmeichel und sucht, als man will, hat es zu tun. Geh verstehen. Mit sein, sucht soll man koidem und kommen zu dem Insel Elias Island. Dort wird man sehen. Es werden sich noch, sucht gießen genieg Tränen auf dem Elias Island. Was heißt der Insel Elias Island? Weil hat einmal gehört, Saiden mit Numen Elie, ist gewesen ein Narr bis zu der Stelle. Also ich sucht in sich Haverford. In dem Heißener Schneider macht einen ganzen weg mit der Hand.
Weiß was breiet, nicht jeden, was sagt, was da wird, reiet, hat der Trost, der Schneider rot.
Land, ich seh Land! denn ich hab jetzt bei mir a Bleier mit Papier.
Sholem Aleichem dir, Columbus, sei gegrüßt, du freie Medina, du goldene, du glückliche Medina. Columbus, hurra Washington, hurra Lincoln, hurra Zivilisation, hurra Freiheit, hurra Gleichheit, hurra Progress, hurra, hurra, hurra. Sholem Aleichem dir, America. Sholem Aleichem dir.
Pretty great, huh? Well, I want to thank everybody who participated, Mark and Joe and Panathika and Ellen and Naomi. It's been really great, and thanks to Jeff for letting us put this on once every 10 years for sure. And be sure to sign up for the Yiddish Festival mailing list because this is some wonderful programs here. I wish everybody a good Pesach, and thank you again all for coming.